All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is the April 19th meeting of the Land Use Development Team Oversight Subcommittee. And may I have a roll call, please?
Chair Eric Friedman,
Here?
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Mike Jordan.
All right, we do have a quorum. And so first we will move on to, are there any announcements, preliminary matters from staff? Not hearing any. We do have the minutes. Have you had a chance to review the minutes? And if so, can I get a motion to approve?
I motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second. Is there any public comment on the minutes? Not hearing any, I will close public comment. All in favor? Aye. Minutes from August 18th, 2022 are approved. Now on to general public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to any items not on today's agenda but under the purview of the LDT? Please come forward now. Not seeing any, I will close general public comment. And now we will go on to our administrative items or agenda items and turn it over to, who's up first? Ms. Dye? Yes. All right. Item A, staffing update.
Thank you, Chair Friedman and committee member. I'm happy to present today that we have filled several vacancies in the last 6 months in building and safety. So if you can remember, at our last meeting, we had over 25% vacancy in the division. So we filled 2 building permit technician positions, 2 senior building inspector positions, 1 electrical specialty, and 1 code compliance specialty, and 2 building inspector positions, and an admin assistant position that supports building and safety, and 1 plans examiner position. So we are down to 2 vacancies. Sorry, the slide's incorrect, but we have 2 vacancies currently, 1 senior plan check examiner and a senior plan check. Well, a senior plan check engineer and a senior plan check position are still open.
Great. Any questions at this point for staffing? So there's just 2 vacancies right now in building and safety?
Correct.
Wow, that is great news because I know we had a number of vacancies there, so that's great, especially with the uptick in work that we're seeing. So go ahead.
Why haven't these 2 positions have been fulfilled?
Thank you, committee member Alejandra. The 2 positions that are vacant have only been vacant. One of them's been vacant for 6 months and the other for 4 months, and these are very difficult positions to fill, so we have to wait till we have qualified applicants to interview before we can fill these.
Why are they difficult to fulfill?
They're difficult to fill because of the specialty, the knowledge that's required to complete the job. You have to have years of experience, and for this example, for the plan check engineer, take some structural experience.
What are some, besides the expertise and experience that these positions require, what are some of the challenges that these 2 positions, and specifically the city, has a challenging? Is it housing? Is it the pay? We've been hearing about how difficult it is to recruit to work for the city because of the competitions we have from the city around. So I'm just curious.
Thank you. That's probably part of it, but for these 2 in particular, we haven't had qualified candidates apply.
Thank you.
And there is a shortage of those types of positions, as I understand it, both in private and public sector.
That's correct.
All right. With that, we'll move on. And we'll do public comment if anyone's here for that at the end. So we're going to combine A, B, C, and D, and you can speak to all of them if anyone from the public is here. On to item B, housing streamlining and process improvements.
Mr. Chair, just one thing, we have planning staffing updates too.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Thank you, Chair Friedman, committee member Alejandro Gutierrez. So the good news is we have recently filled 3 critical positions in our planning team. Planning tech for design review, project planner for long-range planning and special studies, as well as a project planner and design review. And that individual also is allowed to provide some Spanish language access to our customers, which is fantastic. We're always looking for opportunities to expand our bilingual services wherever we can. However, we do have two critical vacancies in our planning division. One of them is city planner. We have now done 2 recruitments for that position. I am in the process of evaluating the second round of candidates with our HR team. I just received that list this morning, as a matter of fact, and we'll be deciding what to do based off the quality of those candidates. We also have a planning analyst position that's currently vacant. That position is vacant because we are waiting to hire a city planner to allow that individual to be involved in the recruitment for the planning analyst position. Depending on how the list looks for city planner, we may or may not shift tactics there and look to maybe move ahead with filling the analyst role ahead of filling the city planner role, depending on how that city planner recruitment is playing out. So that's the update for our planning staffing. Again, I think we're getting positive signs within the division, but still have those 2 critical roles vacant, and we'll be looking to fill those as soon as possible.
Any questions? No questions? Thanks for the update. That the city planner is critical, so glad we're spending time to get it right, even though it's still vacant. All right, and on to the next item, item B.
Yes, thank you, Chair Friedman. This is a good opportunity. You wanted to highlight our Disabled Access Code Forum that will be coming up in this room in a couple of weeks on May 5th. And this is geared towards local business owners, architects, contractors, designers. But staff and some of our committee members will also benefit from this training. And our business analyst, Mark Aguilar, has done a really fabulous job putting this event together. Super excited. Topics that will be covered are things like what accessibility laws apply to my business, what elements of a business must be accessible to the disabled, what's the potential liability if a business does not comply, and then there's some other topics that are accessibility related. So we've done like I said, Mark's done a fabulous job getting this out there. I know that the morning session is almost full, and we have an afternoon session as well. So I recommend anyone that's interested in accessibility take this course. John Caparelli is the presenter. He's a certified access specialist, a chief building official, and just a phenomenal teacher. So if you know of anybody, please spread the word, and if you can attend yourself, it's definitely worth your time. Thank you.
The question was, how do you register?
That's a great question. So you can register online at mytix.com, and this information can be found on the Building and Safety webpage as well.
Great. No further questions, so now still on item B? Or is that off for item B?
I think that's finished, so we can move on
Okay.
to the next item.
All right, item C, the Acela
Actually,
update.
I'm so sorry, forgive my interruption. We do have one more quick update. This was kind of our general, just a quick update for you about housing streamlining and process improvements. It's just one slide. I wanted to share on behalf of our planning division that we have a dedicated work plan and timeline for a package of Title 30, which is our inland municipal code amendments. This is a comprehensive package of things that have been on deck for a while, but there's a clear need to kind of move through this. One is, and part of this package will include a multi-unit housing standards, which this is the successor to the AUD program. So it's creating standards throughout our code in Title 30 to replace that program, because as you all may recall, that our AUD program is set to expire in February of 2024. So this is kind of one of the reasons why we need to get going on this. Part of another set of code amendments as part of this package is the land development process improvements. There are a number of things called out during the Novak report time that could streamline projects, particularly for housing, kind of for some examples, are like getting rid of mandatory concept reviews and, again, kind of getting projects moving through the public hearing process a little faster. Some other updates on different process improvements to allow a little bit more access for the community development director to grant approvals for really minor modifications that don't necessarily deserve a public hearing, to kind of make it a little bit easier for homeowners to get through our process without hearings. And then the last bucket is just zoning ordinance cleanup. So since we introduced the Title 30 to our code in October of 2017, we ended up just compiling a list of little edits or clarifications. These are all non-controversial items that just need to be cleaned up, and we haven't necessarily brought them to you just yet. So this is just to note that we're going to be working on this through December of this year for sure, and you're going to get a fuller presentation on this as part of our budget process. So just a quick FYI. And now you can move on to the next item. Thank you.
Before we go on, any questions on this? I just have a quick question for clarification, because I am sure this will come up at council, is with the AUD program set to expire in February, and the state has the no net loss. We can't just let it expire, because we would be basically downzoning certain portions of the city, and that would have implications not only there but in our housing element. So could you just, in a general sense, what this shift is that we're doing?
So, Chair Friedman, it's basically right now we have a whole chapter on the AUD program, and it's basically taking those portions of within that chapter and sprinkling them throughout the code. And so it's not necessarily an easy exercise, because you have to embed them, and it all needs to make sense, but it's just going to be multi-unit housing standards instead of a separate chapter, a separate program kind of calling it out. It's just going to be established code for multi-unit housing. And again, a lot of these cleanup efforts are to comply with current state legislation, because our code hasn't caught up with the state. So that's a lot of what we're doing here too.
Great, and so that the program will still be there, but it will just, instead of specifically calling it out, it'll just be part of the
It's just going to be our regular standards like any other standard. Correct.
And if I may, Chair Friedman, just to add to Ms. Kokinda's comments, we will be presenting a more thorough review of the ongoing work efforts happening in our planning division during our May 24th budget presentation. And the benefit of that is we can really walk through how these different work efforts sort of influence one another and are coordinated with one another. So in addition to the Title 30 code amendments, we're also working on a number of other things, all having to do with housing and housing production in our community, and trying to make that process more clear and simplified to our applicants, but also allowing more opportunities providing housing to our residents. So as Ellen mentioned, we will be talking about that in more detail on the 24th.
And then and along those lines, the bullet point 2 up here, the process improvements, and you mentioned the Novak report and the 31 recommendations. We've already, as this committee has, we've implemented a lot of those, the low-hanging fruit that we could do, which were process improvements in terms of staffing or how we conduct the counter. But now we're into getting more difficult, because this is not charter amendments, because those are the most difficult. But we're in the phase now where we're implementing some of these harder to do, but they're still achievable, and that's what this process is for some of those. So maybe when you give the budget presentation, perhaps a couple of those recommendations to give us an example of what those are, so that I think the council and the public would say, oh, we've done a lot and this is what we're doing now. So I think it would be a good story to tell that we are making improvements on the process. So, all right, on to item C, and we have a new staff member here. So why don't you introduce yourself and your position, and the floor is yours.
My name is Nicole Fullman. I'm the applications analyst, solely focusing on Acela and improvements within Acela. I started this position in June 4th of last year. I report to IT and am in-house at 630 Garden to support the land use team with Acela. I will be talking about the upgrade to Acela Cloud and why it was important, as well as the future plans for Acela. So why was this upgrade important? Acela no longer supported our old version. There were bugs within the system that could not be resolved without upgrading to a newer version. The upgrade to Acela Cloud allows City to always be on the latest version and receive major updates each year, which provides us with new features and functions, as well as minor updates each month, which include bug fixes and smaller system enhancements. Acela Cloud is accessible from anywhere and no longer requires a connection to the city network. This supports staff to telecommute more easily. City IT can implement LDT staff desired enhancements more quickly in the cloud, as there is more functionality than with the older version. Now that the migration has completed, we can reassess the Acela needs priority list with the LDT and resume prioritizing improvements. And that Acela needs priority list is a spreadsheet that was originally created by the LDT members, just for enhancements within the system. Here's a screenshot of the old version of Acela versus the new version of Acela. This is the back office staff side. The picture on the right is the old version, and the one, on the left is the old version, and on the right is the new version. Acela Cloud post go live plan. The Acela Cloud migration project went live on time on February 27th. With minimal issues that IT and the Acela implementation team quickly resolved. This project was also on budget. Enhancements of the public-facing portal, Acela Citizen Access, are underway with the premium citizen experience, Open Cities, that was purchased alongside the migration. This secondary project is projected to go live in late May, early June, and I'll provide more information on this on the next slide. The premium citizen experience will provide a better look and feel similar to the new city website to our citizen access portal while making site navigation more user-friendly for our public users. Open Cities will also provide the public with a permit decision tool. This permit decision tool will assist the applicants with navigating their permit choices by asking a series of questions about what they're attempting to do and then channeling them to the type of permit application to submit. If this permit decision tool is used, the permit application will be pre-filled with the answers to some of those questions asked, so the applicant does not need to re-enter that information. And this is an example of what this permit decision tool can look like. This is taken from the City of Los Gatos permitting website. The questions and the layout is completely customizable, so we can make it look however we want and ask whatever questions we want to channel them to the correct permit type. FY24 Acela future plans. The plan for Acela in FY24 will include working through the updated Acela needs priority list by the LDT. We will be implementing the building inspection module in the public-facing portal, which will allow the public user or applicant to request building inspections for their cases through Acela Citizen Access. This feature will reduce administrative tasks and give building inspectors more time in the field. Building staff spends ample time each morning going through voicemails and emails to determine their schedule for the day. Phone calls and emails requesting inspections will be phased out except for applicants with accessibility needs. And the electronic plan review software project, the electronic plan review software will allow staff to review and mark up plans on a cloud-based software that is fully integrated with Acela for streamlined plan review workflows. This software will be an overall improvement to the plan review or plan check process. This software will also improve communication with the applicants by providing detailed and more uniform comments and corrections. The vendor demonstrations were all scheduled between March 24th through April 20th. The LDT will select one of the electronic plan review solutions around May or June, with the project projected to start at the beginning of fiscal year 24 as proposed in the IT governance project submittal. So this all has covered where we've been, what we've done, and where we are going.
Thank you, Ms. Fullman. Great to have you on board. I know that was, over the past 2 years, the process to get you here was to get this position filled and to have it in-house or contracted, but it's great to have someone in-house who knows our system. And I know we are still having some contract support directly with Acela, but to have someone here in-house that can really handle a lot of these and be responsive on a very timely basis, it's great to have you here. Any questions?
Yes. On slide number 16, public to request building inspections directly through Acela. For the public, for those that are going to be requesting a building inspection and it's their first time and their first language, it's not English, or they're new to the city, can these individuals still come to our community development department and get help and guide them?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Member. Community Member Gutierrez. Yes, we'll definitely still provide that service to them.
I just don't want, because I've seen it in other sectors where they go onto doing everything online and the public will come to their building and say, nope, you have to go and register online. So I just want to make that clear that the public
Yes, we will
can come.
absolutely still help in other means as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I had the same question because not everyone is tech savvy, but they'd be able to have that flexibility at least their first time and walk them through so the second time they come in or in the future. Or those who just don't have the ability for whatever reasons, we still provide that non-online service. So anything
Can
else?
I just add one more thing? We can also educate the public if they do come to the public counter on how to do it with one of our stations at the lobby.
Perfect. Anything else on Acela update before we move on? Great, thank you.
I'll just add one comment. I mean, I think you were absolutely right, Chair Friedman. I think bringing Nicole on into this role has been a game changer for us in terms of our ability as a city to support the Acela system. The upgrade, we have our IT director in the back of the room, but I think it's safe to say our upgrade went extremely well. We were able to do it on time and on budget, which is fantastic. And this upgrade really does provide us with this really meaningful platform from which we can then move to, as Nicole mentioned, into a lot of the enhancements LDT staff and supervisors have identified as needed improvements to improve our workflows, automate processes, and really save a lot of time and present a lot of value to our customers. And so this is the first step in a sort of paradigm shift, if you will, in a new direction in terms of how we use technology in the city and how we continue to improve that technology such that it provides a tremendous value to our community. And so we're really excited about the next steps. This was a sort of monumental feat in getting us sort of oriented in this new positive direction. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge the work that Nicole has done because it's been tremendously helpful, and it's been accomplished with the help of Alec and Justin and other members of our LDT team. Our We had to do quite a bit of testing. It's called user acceptance testing, and that's all done by the end user. So folks like Jose and members of his team, members of Ellen and Maricella's team, they all work together to test this new system and make sure it was ready to be moved over into our production environment to be used by our applicants and our staff. So it was a real team effort and one that was very positive and successful. And we're really looking forward to taking on sort of the next steps of that continued process improvement that we have committed to in these meetings and other meetings around the city.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacson, and I want to recognize all the staff that went into this and the staffing. And this new model, we'll be able to have, like, as you mentioned, the latest updates, the most user-friendly experience, and not only from the staffing side, where we're going to be more efficient and more effective, which will create time savings and other efficiencies and just customer experience from our staffing side, but for the customer as well. And then they will have, as we're working on that, they will have an enhanced experience from their end too, of being able to navigate everything that it comes in when that goes live. So a lot of work has been done, and there's a lot more to do. But as we saw, the results are there. We're up and running for part of where we want to go, and on time and on budget is always music to our ears at the council. So with that, we will move on to item D, the single-family design board process improvements.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, Ellen Kokenda, I'm the design review supervisor. And we're back here today to discuss the update on single-family design board process improvements. And since our last meeting, as you all are aware, we started off on this and we started having quorum issues in the fall, and we came to you and you amended the SFDB membership, reducing the number of members from 7 to 5, and then you amended the qualifications of the members to have maximum flexibility for however you want to compose the board. So aside from that, we've also been doing quite a bit of other things that we're going to share today. Just want to remind you why we're here. As part of the Novak recommendation, there was an idea to eliminate the single-family design board altogether. We thought as staff that that's a rather dramatic approach and not necessarily one that we think the full community would support. So we're looking at kind of reframing this of how can we continue to maintain value-added process for single-unit residential projects, but by doing that to reduce the number of overall projects that we see at a public hearing, and one, in order to streamline them, and then expanding opportunities for administrative review, and that's basically projects that don't require a public hearing, but that could be reviewed by staff. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I did last time, but the SFDB history, really the whole neighborhood preservation ordinance came to be because there was never a public forum for single-family residences. So back in 1992, single-family design guidelines were adopted. It created a forum. It just so happened to fall under the purview of our Architectural Board of Review because the SFDB did not exist at that time. So ABR's purview was expanded to do single-unit projects. I think we have one of our original ABR members in here who reviewed those projects, and they were meeting on a weekly basis and primarily focused on Hillside, where there was the most visible impact. Years later, the SFDB was created because it was just too much work for one design review board. So now the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance was updated in 2007 after a 3-year process, really adding more context to the guidelines on FAR and how to review projects and kind of trying to prevent McMansionization. So this is kind of the spirit, and the original intention was how do we avoid McMansionization, how do we create a public forum for single-family residences, and how can we have a little bit more oversight in the hillside areas. Most recently, what we've been working on, city staff in collaboration with AIA Santa Barbara launched a survey seeking input from applicants and homeowners on the SFDB design review process. We heard from over 230 respondents, which is really, these are all people who have participated in SFDB review within the last 3 years. And of these respondents, about half were design professionals, architects, land use planners to a smaller extent, and then half were homeowners. So I feel like we got some really good feedback of the different types of applicants that we hear from, and so that was super helpful to be able to be able to have some strong takeaways. This is not a statistically significant survey, but again, to be able to make some insights into this. Based on your input last time, we also wanted to follow up with focus groups. So we had 3 focus groups, with 2 with design review professionals, and then 1 with our local land use planners. And essentially, this was to be able to go a little bit more in depth from what we learned from the survey. And then we also held 9 one-on-one interviews with current and former SFDB members, because we couldn't responsibly say we're just going to talk to applicants and homeowners without having a fuller picture from our board members to kind of say, to balance the picture and have a fuller understanding. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise to you, based on our survey, that a lot of the opinions from the survey and the SFDB process is that it adds time, money, and heartache. And essentially, this is probably why the Novak report initially mentioned or recommended total elimination. But again, we're just going to give you a little snapshot of what we think we mean by that based on our survey responses. We asked respondents to approximate the number of months it took for their projects to receive project design approval, and that's from initial submittal. What we heard back is that we got feedback about half of our respondents reported timelines within 6 months, with the average time from submittal to project design approval being 8 months. And really, this of course varies based on the type of project that you're going to see, what level of review, whether it's full board, whether it's a consent level project, the response time of applicants and how that works. But generally we assume 5 to 6 months for SFDB process. So you can see how this average kind of bumps it up a little bit more from our expectations. Secondly, we asked respondents, did the feedback they received during SFDB hearings significantly alter their costs? And if yes, how much? 63% of respondents reported with no significant cost increase. However, the remaining 37% reported cost increases, with the median being about $50,000. Some of the numbers were really high. Again, you have to take this with a grain of salt. This is just, without any verification, this is just what we heard from applicants and homeowners. And they cited that a number of the reasons that there were where the costs went up is really delays in time towards approval, adding architect and designer fees, requiring specific materials at the different hearings. So I just want to couch that into, again, kind of a sense of what we've heard.
And if I could just jump in, and you don't mind going back to this slide, so this process isn't impacting affordable housing projects, capital A affordable housing projects. However, this cost does directly impact housing affordability in our community, right? So this $50,000 on average additional cost to residential development in our single-family residential development in our city is borne by homeowners and home purchasers. And so we have a already extremely costly housing market in this city, and these added costs further challenge that affordability for Santa Barbara residents. And so while the number 50,000 may not be what to focus on this slide, I think the takeaway is that this process is adding, for many projects, a considerable cost to its construction, and those costs are borne by the consumers of that housing here in town.
Right, and if you can just imagine that if you have one hearing or that gets continued to the next hearing and multiple hearings and changes to your designs, and then you start that just adds costs for individuals, and where costs could potentially be invested in the actual what happens on site as opposed to the process. And then we also asked respondents, what types of comments made by SFDB did you find helpful and unhelpful? And by far, the number one response that we got was architectural style and neighborhood compatibility related to style that were the most unhelpful. And but applicants did say what they did find helpful for SFDB was site planning, different site considerations, and then just general neighborhood compatibility to a lesser extent. And again, it's just to point out that once we had all the survey data, we had our focus groups, and we spoke one-on-one with board members, we started to try to understand where there was, where there were certain things, we could synthesize the data and then maybe distill some points. And we've basically distilled the main problems into 3 main problems. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these on future slides. Go
If
ahead.
we could just pause for a second, because presentation, there's a lot in there, and this is just on the survey results. So if there's questions just on the survey, feel free.
So I have a question here on the slide 26, money. So how do we fix it? How do we fix these extra costs? Because I've come across community members that are excited, they're going to build, and then they always talk about these extremely fees at the city of Santa Barbara. It's really hard to build in because of the time, which I understand why the city takes a lot more time than other cities. I mean, look at how beautiful it is. I mean, it's because we do take our time with each project. But a lot of people will end up either selling or renting just to cover that cost, and then it affects the housing market. So how are we going to fix it? That's
It's a
one
Great
question.
question, Committee Member Gutierrez. I mean, that's exactly what I'm going to get into with this presentation, is to kind of set you up with, I'm trying to give you a narrative about what we heard and kind of distilling the points of where there are problem areas that we've identified that I also have potential solutions in here. So I'm going to get to that point. I can just say broadly, we can do it by reducing, like not making people go to public hearing. That's a lot of extra cost. So by reducing those design review triggers, so maybe a project doesn't even warrant a public hearing. Maybe it's always approved. Maybe they generally aren't controversial projects. So that would reduce a lot of cost, and they could maybe just go straight to building permit instead of stopping through planning first. That's one way. Certainly another way is we can change our procedures to have better hearings, and I'm going to get to that point later on, but I'll make sure to hit on that, and so that, because I have a number of things that I can say about that, and it's really important because, again, I think we could all agree that we'd rather people spend money on like making the actual home better and trying to reduce the amount of process portion of it, if that makes sense. Because people have a limited budget, and I mean, 50,000 may not be a lot for some Santa Barbara homeowners, but it's insurmountable for some, so.
Do you think after these changes in the process or the structure they're made, we will see less of these appeals that come to council?
I will also speak to that.
Okay, I'll let you
and
continue with the presentation.
I've got lots of fun ideas for you all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so again, just the takeaway here, I think that there's a lot of challenge with architectural style as it relates to neighborhood compatibility, and what was really difficult for applicants and homeowners to review. So again, here I'm trying to distill all of these things, all of the things that we heard, all the qualitative data and information we have into 3 main points. One is that defining compatibility, that we have there's very little guidance in the design guidelines about architectural style. We could bolster the comments on neighborhood compatibility, but when there's very little guidance, it means that you can have multiple opinions, and what is the direction? So we don't have great direction for our SFDB board members or applicants as they're proposing projects. We need to manage, one of the major problems is managing expectations. So it was interesting in what we heard. We often had board members and applicants or homeowners pointing to the same problem, but for different reasons, and I'll get into that in the next slide. And then lastly, there's just a general lack of understanding in that members, like if you've never participated in a public process, that the public is really unequipped to be able to participate effectively, and you see that every day. So what do we mean by the problem of defining compatibility? We heard a lot in our survey that neighborhood compatibility has really been misconstrued to mean matching, so that you can only design a house that matches the dominant theme of the other houses in the neighborhoods, which kind of makes it difficult for people who want to propose a different style, or have something that is their wish list, or kind of what they're trying to do, where that gets really temperamental. Neighborhoods in transition. This has been brought up before, that it's really difficult for board members you're always looking back at, you're reviewing against past development, but past development is often smaller. The 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom Santa Barbara home might not necessarily be what is being requested today. So that makes it really difficult to start doing reviewing and defining neighborhood compatibility with mass, bulk, and scale, and what we're seeing. And then because the single-family design guidelines are not explicit, especially around architectural style, it's leaving room for personal interpretations, or what our survey respondents called out as personal biases of SFDB board members. And it's no one's fault. It's just that when you don't have clear guidance, it's just hard everybody's trying to do their best to make it, to interpret, but it just brings up frustrations. In terms of the problem of managing expectations, we have heard a lot about, does this board really, can we just avoid nitpicking of single-family homes? Do you have to look at every single thing, or can you take a step back as a board and say, is this project acceptable? Is that really kind of the spirit of starting? And because of that, oftentimes we heard a lot about there being a hostile environment, but this is one of those points where, from applicants and homeowners, we heard of this adversarial attitude when they're on this side of the table. But from board members' perspectives, oftentimes they're thinking about applicants come in with a sense of entitlement. I've got my dream home. I don't care what the rest of my neighborhood looks like. This is what I want. And so it does create this kind of defensive environment that was often described. To your point about what we can do, one of the problems is having insufficient context, so I am going to be talking a little bit more about this. We have oftentimes, by the time an applicant gets to a hearing, the SFDB is asking for more submittal requirements, because the SFDB is doing so much guesswork to understand what is the neighborhood context. You're proposing this new single-family residence, but I have no idea how this fits in with the neighborhood, and they're asking for more and more information, and it's frustrating to the applicants because they get here and they're like, hey, I just submitted everything on your checklist, but now I'm being asked to submit more. I wish I would have known that up front. So that's one of those points of where we can definitely make it less guesswork and support applicants. And then to the point of Florida lot area ratio, FAR, this is where we heard a lot about, if you recall, we often talk about the 85% sweet spot for FAR. When the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance findings were expanded in 2007, the FAR was a huge part of it to kind of bring down prevent McMansionization. It is a guideline, not a rule or requirement, and we've seen this is getting pushed a lot more because of ADUs. And so we're seeing negotiations of, can you bring this down from 86% to 85% without really having clarity on what that means, what is in terms of project acceptability. And then this is, again, such a huge point because I do want to call out that we did not interview or discuss anything with members of the public or, the neighbors. Our survey and our focus groups and our one-on-one conversations didn't discuss things with neighbors, but we know for sure that, again, a lot of people who show up to these SFDB review meetings, they don't know anything about SFDB's purview. They're unclear of the differences between a zoning standard and a design guideline. They're unfamiliar with hearing procedures and decorum, and so we've had a lot of inappropriate things come up or, where we've had to intervene because it's just not, because people don't know how to engage. And it's, again, not their fault. And then we also have this awkward appeal process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And that's just, trying to navigate an appeal of a design review decision. So stepping back, what are our goals? Reducing the project load. We want to maintain a public forum. We're not saying to just get rid of that for single-family residences, but let's do it responsibly. And then we want to set up expectations for success. And I'm going to say set clear expectations for project review, particularly around neighborhood compatibility, because neighborhood compatibility is squishy, it's gray, we could spend years trying to define it, but there will always be discretion, and but we can do a better job than or reset our intentions starting now. And again, digging deeper into this problem, there are several root causes. We can look at. We've just had this over-reliance on design review, that we're relying on SFDB to do more than it needs to. This came out of when we adopted Title 30. There are a lot of things that required modifications at the staff hearing officer. We took those because that's a much bigger decision. We brought it and we said, we're going to take that out of the staff hearing officer or planning commission's hands, and we're going to put it in design review. And the purpose of that was actually streamlining. That was actually a faster move to do that and less onerous. But now we can even peel that back a little bit more. And so I just want to identify that SFDB, the number of triggers have been added to over time because of that zoning amendment change, as discretionary ADUs have been added. A whole host of things have been added. Secondly, inadequate housing stock. Our post-World War II housing does not really meet today's needs or wants. We've got so much data that we're sitting on that people are building second stories on their properties. They're demoing and rebuilding their homes altogether. There's just a lot that's happening. We have at the state level, they're allowing, we've kind of had this door that opened up to allow further densification of single-family zones with ADUs. So we're seeing all this type of development that's kind of putting tensions on the neighborhood. So to your point, committee member Gutierrez, I think we're going to see more appeals because there's no, if I own a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home and I want to upgrade, there's very little 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes that I could even afford. But then there's probably not much in the housing stock to begin with. So you start to see where people are trying to stick with the properties they have and make improvements and to densify them as much as we'll allow, quite frankly, in some ways. And that's where that tension comes from. And then just generally subjectivity of review. This is what we see with SFDB is property rights versus neighbor opinion. And they're both right. You can have both right at the same time, that someone wants their dream home, but then someone next door says, this is impacting the neighborhood, or this is impacting my project. And how do we address that? That's just kind of design review in general. This is the challenge and why SFDB has such a difficult job. Solutions. We want to amend key problem areas within the neighborhood preservation ordinance, kind of look at the findings, look at the design guidelines where we can bolster, and then also probably make some code amendments to reduce those design review triggers. We want to make sure that we're setting clear expectation of roles and responsibilities and have better outcomes with our hearings, and then improve communication. So how can we connect homeowners, people who are lay people who will do this one time in their life, and neighbors to tools to make this process more accessible? And what do I mean a little bit more specifically for solutions? How can we be more explicit, again, bolster the guidelines about architectural style, and really get back to making sure that we're supporting architectural diversity? Even though that was the intention, it's just not very explicit as it's written now. And I think we could recommit to that concept and bolster that. Looking at mass, bulk, and scale evaluation, helping applicants bring better materials related to FAR to hearings so that The SFDB avoids any kind of arbitrary direction of like, can you, again, reduce this from 87% to 86%? It's like they need to understand what are these numbers, what is contributing, and different ways to look at that. Reducing the number of projects is really going to help staff. This is going to be a major load off staff in order to do more quality control of plans so that board members have better plans to review starting off. And then expanding administrative approvals. Again, we have so many different new materials that could be added. Our current SFDB guidelines limit us with certain types of things, but there's all this new construction materials, interesting things. We've learned so much through our AIA community and our contractors association of different things that we could consider for admin approval. Shared understanding, I want to point out how critical the solution is of you all making council appointments and ensuring that board members align with adopted SFDB goals and a direction, what is the intention? I want to thank you so much for the members that you just appointed. I'm so excited about the membership of our SFDB. We have a really solid group of 5, and I cannot wait to work with them. So thank you, and just what that means to us. Submittal requirements, this is one of those pieces where we can avoid the SFDB guesswork and applicant frustration by saying, okay, as part of your initial submittal, if you're building a new house, if you're adding a second story or doing something, anything over 85% FAR, these are required submittals. You have to do the 20 closest lot survey. You have to do this. We leave that up to SFDB to for them to, applicants to just say, maybe I don't have to do it, but they're always asking for it. So we can just spare SFDB the guesswork and we can help applicants out in the process. That's easy. Staff's role, it's really hard to jump in and try to direct a board. We've taken a laissez-faire attitude in the past. I think staff can play a stronger role in interjecting, especially because people need to be reminded of what their purview is, and when they get off track, it's not helpful for the board, it's not helpful for the applicants, and it's certainly not helpful for members of the public. So we need to bulk up our work on that. And then improved communication, standardized examples. This will help the homeowner who doesn't know anything about design review to have supplemental materials that are templates provided that they don't have to necessarily spend all this money up front to get to a design review board or to get to SFDB. But it will help reduce their overall project costs, and it will improve the quality of their review, because we don't need to, it doesn't mean that every designer or architect has to create the same thing. They could, but again, we would have templates available. Leverage our existing tools. This is a way we can create new informational material. Web pages, probably the most effective of how to ensure meaningful participation. We already did this by updating our website a year ago, but this is kind of part 2 to that of what is design review? How, what can I expect at a public hearing? What's an appeal? What are design guidelines? These are all questions that we can easily provide answers to and help people be part of the process and conversation. And then lastly, amend the SFDB appeal process, which is our idea to take appeals off your plate at council and move them to the Planning Commission. So I have maybe 3 more slides. And so you all, this is probably a surprise, fun thing coming off the heels of 2 really tedious SFDB appeals, things that you don't want to hear. But we are requesting consideration today of the concept of amending our municipal code, Title 22, to direct SFDB appeals to the Planning Commission instead of City Council. And this would only apply to SFDB. It wouldn't apply to ABR and HLC because those are charter boards and SFDB is a little different. And why are we asking for this consideration? One is that, to your point, I think we can expect a trend of increasing number of SFDB appeals just based on the types of projects we're seeing and what people are doing to their homes and development. It also streamlines things for both applicants and appellants. It takes a long time to get to city council. We have to first set a date for the hearing. And, it just is like extra stuff and steps. And, it can take months and months before we can actually get on. Appeals to council are extremely staff intensive and involve multiple departments. So because of our ordinance requirements, we have the clerk's office sends a mailing and has to do with the legal ad, but community development has to do a mailing here. We're working with the city attorney's office, community development clerk, and it's a lot of oversight for single-family projects that we could all do in-house, a lot more streamlined, where it would make it more of like a one-stop shop. And as I mentioned, the appeals process is very awkward for all people involved. And then PC is really familiar with reviewing plans and considering land use and design impacts. So, they're fully equipped to be able to look at these things. So this is, yet another reason why we think it's an appropriate move. And then, quite frankly, at both the last couple of appeal hearings, I've heard practically every council member say it's really not your preference to have to look at these. So that's just another thing. And we are requesting to fast track this. There's a number of appeals that are coming up, and there's more that are on deck. But again, we know that this is probably going to continue to happen, and we'd like your input on this today. I do want to point out there's one other appeal process concept that we want to run by you all and get your feedback on, but we're not requesting to fast track this. This is a request to consider amending the same portion of that code to reduce the number of SFDB appeal points, specifically to reduce, that we don't necessarily need 2 appeal points. So we've got project design approval, which is kind of overall mass bulk scale, everything okay, and then final approval is just the details. That's 2 appeal points, and that's not streamlining things, because if you can appeal both things, the applicants have to wait 10 calendar days for each process. So even if they get final approval, they can't even submit for their building permit for another 10 days until that appeal period runs out. It was already identified in the Novak report as a possible thing. We're bringing it to you. We just want, again, to kind of run this concept by you. It's confusing for the public of like, which one do I appeal? And if they do appeal a final approval, there's very limited things that you could actually do at that point. It's only the little minor details. You can't alter the mass, bulk, and scale of things. So again, it's really, we think it's sufficient for there to only be one appeal for SFDB. And the reason we're requesting that it's not fast-tracked is because this does involve other LDT members and procedures and process. So lastly, just as a quick follow-up, we will be targeting the single-family design guideline problem areas and coming up with our implementation plan to improve hearings. We're asking to draft code amendments to change the appeal process to go from council to planning commission. And then we will be coming back to you because we're sitting on a mountain of data and I couldn't do it all today. So I wanted to give you the narrative first, and then at our next conversation, we'll be coming back with concrete design review triggers to propose to take away, and then ideas for administrative approvals. And that'll be that kind of hard numbers of like how many hearings can we expect to not see anymore with that. And if we have some questions for you today, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. I'm really thrilled and happy to answer anything.
Great. Before we get into questions, I will say I do see some members of the public. If you want to speak and you haven't already, please submit a slip to Ms. Walters. And I'll keep that open until we get to that portion. So with that, I'll open up to questions from my colleague. Okay. I'll start off then.
Sorry, I apologize. I do have one question. I remember when the Novak report came back, and there was a question about the single-family design board members, that a project would come in, and then they would ask the applicants to make changes, and there was a board member absent, and so when they would come back with those changes, the board member was present that was absent, and they had suggestions on that project, and so the applicant had to go back And so I was wondering if we had fixed that problem where if a board member is not present and a project comes and they make the changes, I don't think it's fair for the applicant to have to make the changes because the board member wasn't there.
Thank you, committee member Gutierrez. So that's actually really interesting you bring that up because we have our public service and decorum training that the city clerk's office and human resources have been putting on. And the mayor has been attending these, and he's going to many of our advisory boards and has started off within the planning division and our design review boards. And that's one thing that the direction that he's given our design review boards is saying, you need to honor the comments of your colleagues if you weren't there, or if you're jumping in and kind of catching up, don't bring up new things. It really, the applicant needs to be able to rely on the minutes and the motion and the instructions that are included in those minutes and not pull out new things by the time they're trying to get project design approval. So yes, that's another place where staff could probably do a little better job of running interference and being like, and working with the chair, of course. I mean, I have the chair can also help to manage some of that and say, we addressed that at the last hearing and that's not really appropriate, and we've kind of moved on and the applicant addressed that.
And the reason I'm asking is because, we are suffering with the housing stock. So I can see homeowners that have children here that are probably going to build on their property, and that's going to be the first time submitting these type of projects. And I've heard of many incidents, and this was why I was very involved in this specific committee, where when they come to the single-family design board, that's where it's like, forget it, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to continue to. It's also emotionally very stressful for these individuals. And we have the individuals that go through this process that have the means to hire somebody that will walk them through. But I think we're going to see more new property owners that have never gone through this system. And so I'm really appreciative that you guys are doing the work now. I just want to really kind of keep that in mind, that we don't want to discourage people from completing their dreams.
Absolutely. And if I could just add to that or respond, and I think first of all, it's kind of building awareness. I want our applicants, I'll be able to share this with both SFDB and our AIA friends. And I think it's really important to recognize how terrifying it is to be on this side of the table and kind of, you just don't know what you're going to get, and it's scary, and you think, oh my gosh, a lot of people work with their neighbors to try to figure out stuff, and their neighbors are still just never going to be satisfied. So that's intimidating too, because it's like, well, I'm working with the SFDB, responding effectively to all of their comments, but where do I go from, what's going to happen? So there's just a lot of unknowns, and I think having that awareness of that it could feel adversarial or hostile, that we all have a role in recognizing, okay, let me meet you where you are, and let me try to help you with that. And again, I think we have an excellent board to do that with.
Any further questions? All right. I just have one. Most of my questions were actually answered. It's more of a clarification because we've had both appeals, different types of appeals. Lately, there have been appeals for project design approval, but in the past, we've had the final approval, and you're mentioning kind of reducing that option. Could you speak to the nuance of when a final design gets appealed and the very limited scope? Because I think that is one where not only it delays the applicant, but it also creates false expectations for the public because they think they can appeal the project. And we, as much as we try to nuance and say we can only do these little pieces that we can have oversight on, that message gets lost to the neighborhood out there. So if you could just speak to when you're appealing a final design, the narrow scope of it.
Right. So the way that projects move through the process, they come in for concept review. That's just getting comments. There's no action that the board takes. When we deem it, when staff deem it complete, meaning that it meets all of our regulation, zoning code, and it's been routed to all of our LDT friends, they've reviewed it for completeness, and it meets all the standards, we can schedule it for project design approval. And that's essentially kind of saying that the mass, the bulk, and the scale, that the overall, like, you know, kind of where it's located, the siting, the shape, all of that is, that's kind of locks that in. And there's a 10-day appeal period for project design approval. And then people come back and submit for final approval, and that's just details. That's, oh, I'm going to use this lighting, and I'm going to use these windows and this detail on, you know, the facade or something. It's all small details. So when someone appeals a final approval, they have to, it's really, the decision is just that it has to substantially conform with what got approved at project design approval. And so it's just minor detail stuff. They can't, like, people often, they've missed the boat if they're appealing at final approval. And one thing, the reason you haven't seen that in a while is because we changed our process based on your direction to add a mailed notice at project design approval, so that now people are getting the postcards at project design approval, which is the meaningful time that they need to participate. I mean, clearly we want them to participate at concept early on, but that's really the meaty one, that if you have an issue with it, you can do that. And that mailed notice has really changed that, why we haven't seen as many final approval appeals. But now it's just the question of, do we really need 2 appeals for just minor stuff? It really, that kind of begs the question, and why we've asked.
Thank you. And so, yeah, and so the size, bulk, scale, neighborhood compatibility still has the option to be appealed, but that would be at the project design approval. So, all right, I'm going to open it up to public okay. Sure.
Just a follow-up question. You reminded me of the postcards that go out, which I think it's a great idea because they're bright orange and they're hard to miss. But in neighborhoods like the districts that I represent, especially like in the Milpas area or in the West Side, you have projects that come about and they hardly get any type of attention, just because the people that live in those neighborhoods are not familiar or intimidated by the process. And so when I come across appeals, they're usually in neighborhoods where there's wealth and there's access. But if you go to the neighborhoods, like in the Milpas area, they are building 2 stories, condominiums or apartments, and that the windows are overseeing the neighbors', you know, backyard and intimacy. Are we doing anything in that outreach process of how to encourage neighbors to get more involved and not feel too intimidated? And I know this is an overwhelming question and ask, but I just want to, just for the staff to keep in mind, like, how can we better outreach to those communities? Because I'm sure you've heard it on council, like, we're gentrifying the city. And I think the city of Santa Barbara has done a really good job in not trying to change the city too much. But there are certain pockets of neighborhoods that you can go to the neighborhoods and they will tell you, like, this is not fair, look at this design, they're literally, I have no privacy, but they're really intimidated about the process. Sure. And it's because, for example, for the single family design review board, do we have somebody available if there's a Spanish speaker? That maybe that person is very familiar with plans and the process, but the way that their first language is Spanish, and they would feel more comfortable if they had an interpreter there. Just little things like that.
Yes, Councilmember Gutierrez, we do have, if people request it, we can bring an interpreter in and support any individual in that process. I will say that I think we want to try to get at kind of the best bang for your buck for creating, again, web materials that maybe could be translated in some ways, of trying to help people understand just basics, foundation of, again, what to expect at a public hearing, what is design review, what are all these approvals, what is, like, we don't answer those questions. It's kind of like someone has to come to us and kind of figure it out on their own. And if you just walk in here and sit in this chair, you're not really going to put it together very easily, and you're going to start talking about parking, and you're going to start talking about things that really aren't within the purview of a particular board. So we want to be able to empower people through communication tools in order to help them understand just simple foundational questions. And generally, it always helps to come in and talk to people at the counter. But even that is not, coming into a government building isn't always a comfortable thing for people. So I think, again, having materials easily accessible on the web too can help. And I would certainly be interested in hearing other ideas if you have them. Because that's not just an SFDB issue. That's kind of a larger kind of, well, I mean, it's all related. Design review, development review, all of the things of how can you participate in your community and have input on how things are changing.
Great. Thank you. I have public comment. I have two speakers. I have Fred Sweeney, you're up first, and then Leslie Kalas, you're up next.
Mr. Chair and Committee, could I allow Ms. Kloss to go first? She's got an appointment, and then I can come after her. That would be okay.
Feel free. We are flexible here.
Like yogis. Leslie Kalas, currently serving as chair on single-family board. I'm glad I'm here today hearing a lot of this. It's helpful for me. Just a couple comments in regards to what I've heard specifically, as well as observations I've made serving. So the first one is in regards to the $50,000, I'm going to call it a guesstimate that probably professionals made. My question would be, how do we put that in context? What was the baseline cost of that project before it came in? Was that a $4 million house that was going to get built and we added 50 grand to it? And where was that 50 grand added? Because if I think about what professionals are charging in town, that's 150 to 200 hours. That's a lot of time. And it's probably more time. I think that's probably an overestimate, but that's just a comment. It needs to be kept in context. If applicants believe that site planning issues are an area that we are most helpful in providing direction or tweaking projects, then I would really encourage the city council and staff to consider making a civil engineer or a landscape architect a required board member for our board. Architects, we have general site planning capabilities, but we don't get in the idiosyncrasies of a lot of things that a civil engineer or a landscape architect could do. So I think removing that requirement from the board was unfortunate. I heard staff say that originally the intent of this board was to avoid McMansionization. And I think we need to get really honest with ourselves about what's happening in town, because the bigger the better is what's happening right now. People are buying houses because they're view parcels, and they're tearing them down, and they're building as big as they can. They're maxing it out. They've got the money to do it, and they're gonna do it. So this is like, if that's really the intent of the board and we intend for it to continue that way, we need to think about this in a bigger way in terms of what our purview or what our guidelines are, or how are we putting constraints surrounding that. And maybe one of those questions that we asked ourselves in terms of housing stock is, are we trying to allow everybody to do what they want or what they need to do in order to live in our town? And where is that magic line? And how can we walk that line without constraining development rights? I understand that's a legal issue. Ms. Gutierrez, one of the things that I heard you say, which really resonates with me because I used to be a homeowner on the east side. I sold my house last year. I went in front of the design board when Mr. Sweeney was chair of the board, and my project ended up being appealed 2 or 3 times by a neighbor who was ticked off. They appealed it not only on SFD grounds, but also on building code grounds. So that was another point of appeal where they were able to appeal the project. So that might be something that's considered. And one of the things that is a hurdle, I think, to lower income families on the east or the west side possibly is the cost of an appeal. I think an appeal these days is $700 or $800. That's a lot of money for a multi-generational family who's lived on a property for years, and maybe they have a lot of equity in the property, but they don't have a way to leverage that because they don't have an income stream. So that's a concern. And I understand the privacy issues. It's one of the reasons I sold my house, because I had beautiful views, I had privacy, and now behind my old property, 6 feet away, is a 2-story house that I can tell you right now, my board, the board that I'm sitting on, could have done nothing about, or very little about, with the guidelines that we're working with. Privacy issues are going to continue to be, in my opinion, the biggest points of appeals that we deal with. So if there's any way for us to address privacy issues, views, not only into parcels, but also broader views, it's going to help cut down on the appeals a lot. I totally support the idea of the appeals going to Planning Commission as opposed to your board. Those are my only comments.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments and your work on the board. Mr. Sweeney, you got 3 minutes.
And councilperson. Thank you, Ms. Kokinder. It's taken 8 years, but we're there. I have been writing memos on many of these subjects to staff and council for 8 years, because I served on the board 10 years before I got so frustrated I left, because things, in my view, weren't being paid attention to. So, but that being said, we now have someone in charge that's moving ahead, and I agree with 100% of what she just presented to you. I agree with my colleague that just spoke. And Ms. Gutierrez, I'm going to still continue to try to reach out to you, to talk with you offline, because my biggest worry is not the people that have money. They're going to get what they're going to get. It's the people that don't have money in this town. One of the challenges that we're all dealing with is that under the state of California, if you want to build a home, you don't have to have an architect. You can do the drawings yourself. You can do it on a napkin. Now, I can tell you when it gets to Ms. Dye's department, that ain't going to work, but that's the biggest part of the problem. And I can tell you that when, as chair, I sat here for 6 years and sometimes found myself having to deal with possible physical altercations. And I had no training of how to deal with that. And it's because people get so frustrated, the heartburn, the heartache. That's the biggest part of this issue, because most of these projects would never see the light of day at the Planning Commission, just because of the way our rules are set up. So for most people, this is a Planning Commission meeting. They want to look at parking, they want to look at construction traffic, noise, all that stuff, none of which we have purview over. Our hands are tied. It's very hard to explain to an audience, and there are many times I've looked up and seen 20, 30 people sitting out here just furious. And it's frustrating as a chair and a member of that board not being able to have the tools in place to deal with it. You know what? Thank you so much, because everything you're proposing, a lot of which you and I talked about are on those slides, is going to get you there. So those questions, Ms. Gutierrez, that you're asking are going to get answered. It's a lot of work. I want to talk about, I sent you a long memo, which you can read. It has 12 points. I know that the city attorney's office is going to have a problem with a couple of them. That's okay. But 2 things. One is I'm sad I was late getting here to see the Excella presentation. But I can tell you my experience in the last 6 weeks has been absolutely frustrating. And I'm a professional, and I have a whole staff that helps me. So I hope it gets improved. It's been very, very difficult dealing with an application for one of the,
That's your time, but I'll
Oh,
let
I'm
you
so- oh,
wrap
sorry.
up your point.
okay, deal with that. So I hope that gets cleared around. I think a couple of things. One, most of us order things from Amazon. You get an immediate response that says, we received it, we're going to process it. That doesn't happen with that program. The other thing is your website, your phones, whatever, don't tell you that you're closed every Friday. And thirdly, most of the construction world works 40 hours a week. Most of us rely on being able to communicate through that whole course of 40 hours. The building department, this building is only open 14 hours a week for the community. And you better get here before noon or you're out of luck. And I know we had to deal with that because of COVID, et cetera, but that needs to change. Not being able to get in and communicate with anybody in here is really, really a tough problem. And your websites and all of that need to be changed.
Good points, and I encourage you to bring them up during the budget deliberations when the
Okay.
department presents.
And then
so we get the
finally,
full council there.
finally, just the last thing, and I'm going to continue to ask for this as in perpetuity. You need an ombudsman architect to help with the individual who first language may not be English, with the individual that is scared to death to sit in that chair, that never has to do this in their entire life except once. And we need to have a city architect that can sit and review all of these things that don't need to go in front of the full board. And I'm going to continue to ask for that in your budgets. You need an ombudsman architect or some program that allow that to happen. Maybe the AIA can do that. And you need a design architect, not only for the SFDB,
We'll
but
have
the
to
other ones.
Have you wrap up, Mr. Sweeney. I actually
Thank
have a
you.
3 o'clock committee meeting that I'm going to
Thank
be
you.
late for. So, all right, last public comment coming up is Clay Oral. And you can go till the buzzer goes. And if you got a couple extra seconds, I'll give you time too.
All right, thank you for allowing me to speak. I have a few points here. I'm not going to go through them all because I think Fred and Ms. Kalas did a great job going through a lot of them. I sat on both sides of that table for many years. I was on ABR when we split into 2 boards, SFDB and ABR. I'm on the advocacy committee for AIA. I've been involved with Ellen and others on the surveys, the creation, and you didn't start the timer, I think.
I'm keeping time here.
Okay,
When
got it.
you'll hear it when it's 3 minutes.
And this is a big hot topic for the AIA. I'm not here representing the AIA, I'm representing myself. I'm an architect, local architect in the community, so thank you for upgrading Acela. Whatever you guys are doing here, please go to the county and fix their problem. They really need it. Couple things about just the monetary thing. In our office, we track anything related to planning and entitlements. And I can tell you it's significant cost on certain projects. One on the shoreline, one on Harbor Hills, another one on Las Alturas we just processed. It can be well over 50K, and just in terms of our costs, not just the delay in time, but it's real. One thing that I think is interesting to point out is compatibility. So that word has been tossed around on ABR when I was there. It's tossed around continuously on all the boards and commissions. I really think that maybe AA Advocacy and others can help define that for the city and help work with you guys, but also workshop with the board members, because that's what's really needed, because that's where a lot of the confusion I see lies is that compatible or not compatible? And a lot of times compatibility is confused with homogeneity, which if you drive through Lancaster or Palmdale or any of those places, you'll see all the beige buildings lined up 10 feet apart, and that's not compatibility in my viewpoint. I do think FAR is an issue. It really needs to be studied. Whether it's a guideline or a rule, it really needs help. I wanted to talk a little bit about the appeal process. I had a project many years ago that had the 2-step appeal, got appealed at PDA, got appealed at final, went to council both times. None of you were there, but that is a very hard process, and it was really the neighbors didn't like each other. That's it. It took 3 years to get the approval for the house. It took 6 months to build it. So that's a little lopsided when you think about construction in general. I think there should be a way for us to decide or determine what are frivolous appeals, because there's a lot of them. And sometimes the neighbors don't like each other, sometimes it's real, sometimes there's privacy issues, I get all that, but there are a lot of those that come through that I've seen, that you guys have probably seen as well at council. I think we're moving in the right direction. Definitely, I think, I have one more point, sorry, I thought I was gonna be much faster. We're moving in the right direction, for sure, and on this particular topic, but I still think we can do more. The biggest issue of time delay and cost right now is the PLN process. I don't know why that process is invented for single-family projects. It can take 6 to 7, I've had projects almost a year, just going cycle after cycle after cycle on the PLN process. It is extremely costly. I know we're not here to talk about that, and I know I've brought it up to you before, but I want to bring it up here just because it needs to be looked at. It is not needed for residential. PLN process replaced the DART process, which was really for complicated projects that needed extensive review, needed to go through every department. And doing that on a garage remodel or addition, it's pretty heavy-handed for most people. Anyway, thank you. I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you all for your comments, very informative. So I do apologize, I got scheduled back to back, so we'll try to get through this pretty quickly, but I'll just start off real quickly for my points. I concur with a lot what I heard today, and I want to thank our staff for putting this together. There's a lot here, and we're going to be vetting a lot, but we are getting into some of the more substantive issues that came out of the Novak report and others. For me, when you set clear expectations of compatibility, reduce the triggers, and having the projects go to single-family design board, that'll lead to greater clarity for both the applicants and the community the neighbors on there. So that'll lead to better processes, which will ultimately save time, save costs, but also just have more. I think it'll be more effective public input too from the community, and a lot of what we're proposing today will get us there. Specifically today, I think we should be moving forward the appeal points that we talked about. The single-family design board to the planning commission on fast-tracking that. I'm supportive of that. I think it's a good idea. We've had a number of appeals, and there's more coming to the council, and we're just not equipped to deal with that number of appeals. I think we've struggled at the council last night, the week before, and as we look at compatibility, understanding what that means, and a lot of these, the 85% rule. What is hard and fast, what is some flexibility, but within flexibility refining those guidelines so it's not open to interpretation of one person, and then you come back next week and get something else. So those are my comments, and then my colleague, but what I'd like to do is we could do I think we need three motions, or we could do a motion. One would be for the single-family design board to go to the planning commission appeals, so we can do that fast track. We can move that today. I'm open to it if you are. The appeal points, move that forward, but in a separate process, and then also the trigger points, move that forward. Are there any other direction that you specifically needed from us today, Mr. Isaacson or Ms. Kokinda?
Not at this time. I think that gives us enough information, and we've got plenty more to come back to you with, and with our board, with input from our board members, and we'll get more input from them, as well as continue to work with our AIA partners on this. So no, this is great.
So that's where I am, and would you like to make comments, and we'll get some motions going here.
I really want to thank city staff for their hard work. This is very meaningful to me personally, though I've said it in preview interviews of why I ran for city council, and this was one of them. Experiencing going to the community development department when my father wanted to build his dream home and have his children live in the same property because Santa Barbara is getting really expensive. He wasted over $50,000, which half of his savings. Then he ended up losing his kidney. And it was heartbreaking. My dad, to this day, wants nothing to do with the city, unfortunately. He was very shocked when I decided to run. But I saw firsthand that we had a broken system. And I am so thankful for the staff that you guys have really heard the community, that outreaching you've done, our recommendations, and thank you for the public comment. I do agree. I'm really looking forward to moving this process forward and just making the system better. So thank you so much.
All right, so I'm going to make a motion here. Be one motion with three different parts. The first part would be that we support moving the single-family design board appeals would go to the planning commission rather than the council, and moving that on a fast-track process. The second part would be looking at the appeals points and modifying those, moving that forward, but also through a process, but not necessarily the fast tracking. And then also looking at trigger points for what would be go to the single family design board versus something that could be probably handled with the staff hearing officer, and bring that back to this committee for more review once you identify what those points are. So I'll make that motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.